Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
A couple of questions, if we can be succinct, because I have a lot of questions for you, actually. Would you tell America what is an automatic weapon?
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't seem to understand what the differences are right now. You have three different types of weapons. You have a machine gun, which is one pull of the trigger, many bullets come out. Semi-automatic, one pull of the trigger, one bullet comes out, and then it reloads. One pull of the trigger, one bullet comes out, and so on. And then you have manually loaded guns where you have to actually go and do some additional operation to put another bullet in the chamber after you fire it each time.
How hard is it to get an automatic weapon?
Oh, it's extremely difficult. There's 250,000 licenses in the country, or there are 250,000 guns that are there. But you have to go through an extensive background check. You have to pay an extra fee. And you're talking about weapons that, even ones that don't work, will run you at least about $15,000 or so.
And who has to give you the license?
The federal government.
Which department?
Will it be the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
All right, so when people say there's the automatic weapon and you can get them easily online, that's a lie. They don't know what they're talking about, or they're flat out lying, aren't they?
No, that's correct.
Semi-automatic weapon would be a modern rifle, would it not?
Yeah, I mean, most hunting rifles are semi-automatics. You know, pistols, you basically have two types. One that would be called semi-automatic, and then the others, which would be revolvers, even though, I mean, in some functional sense, they're similar. But those basically, all the pistols just about fall into one of those two categories.
By the way, are bombs licensed? Or they're just flat out illegal, aren't they?
Well, you can get licenses for having different types of explosives, but that's a much more detailed process than anything we're talking about with guns.
All right, we got that out of the way. Now, this was another so-called gun-free zone. You immediately wrote about that and said, look, we're going to keep having carnage around this country if we don't stop with these gun-free zones. Explain yourself.
Right. It's gotten very frustrating that the media just ignores this, but there's if you live in Florida or a lot of other right-to-carry states, Virginia, you can carry your permit concealed handgun virtually any place in the state, but there are some places where you're not allowed. So in many states it may be schools you're not allowed, or there are 10 states that will ban you from being able to carry a gun in a place that gets more than 50% of its revenue from serving alcohol, such as the one that occurred Sunday morning. And, you know, the problem that you face is that these killers who do these types of things aren't stupid. They want to go and try to kill as many people as possible, and they know that if somebody's there quickly on the scene with a gun, they can stop them. We saw this just a couple months ago. There was a case in Michigan where a father was concerned that his son was getting deeply involved in ISIS, had contacted the FBI. The FBI put a tap on his phone, and they have this amazing wire where he's going through and explaining how he's going to attack one of the largest churches in the Detroit area. And at the top of his list, for reasons, is that he had checked them out and realized that people were not allowed to have permanent concealed handguns there at the church. And so he thought it would be a large group of people that would be relatively easy for him to be able to quickly kill. And so, look, police, guards in uniform, they do a great job. But they have an extremely difficult job when you're talking about stopping these types of mass public shootings. And the reason is that they stand out there with like a sore thumb. Terrorists have a huge strategic advantage. They can either, by choosing the time and place of the attack, they can either kill the guard first, they can wait for them to leave, or they can pick another venue that's there. And a guard, he can't possibly, or police officer can't possibly be cognizant minute after minute, day after day of anybody who might be approaching from any angle against him. And so they put their lives on the line being there. But simply relying only on a police officer or guard to stop these attacks doesn't make any sense. I mean, France last year, after it had its first mass public shooting in January, Charlie Hebdo, put 10,000 military on the street to guard targets. It's simply not serious. I mean, there's so many possible targets that you have there that it's simply impossible for 10,000 or 100,000 to go and guard every possible case. And what you see happen time after time, when we find statements left by these individuals in the United States in mass public shootings, it's how they consciously try to find places where they know victims can't defend themselves. The Charleston shooting last year, the killer's first target was actually Charleston College, but he decided not to do it when he investigated and saw that there was armed security there that might stop him. When the diaries came out last year from the Aurora Batman movie theater shooter, it turns out his first target was going to be an airport until his investigation told him the same thing, that he would be killed before he was able to kill many victims there. In fact, if you look at the movie theaters, there were 7 movie theaters within a 20-minute drive of his home. Only one of those posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. That's the theater he went to, the Lafayette movie theater last year. The guy went to the only movie theater in the area that posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. The year before, you look at cases like the Santa Barbara shooter or the New Brunswick case in Canada. Again, when you read the documents that these killers have left, it's very clear that they tried to pick a place where they knew that people would not be able to go and protect themselves. So one can go and talk about people being mentally ill or what have you, but that doesn't mean that they're stupid, and doesn't mean that they don't know how to try to accomplish the task. They want to get media publicity. They know the more people they kill, the more attention that they're going to get, and so they act accordingly and usually spend 6 months to 2 years planning these attacks in advance.
John Lott, we've talked about this before. The terrorist watch list, the Democrats are saying everybody on that list should be banned from purchasing a gun. The problem is the list is a mess, isn't it, John?
Yeah, well, there are 2 different types of lists. There's a terror watch list and a no-fly list. The last numbers that we have for the terror watch list indicate that there were some 700,000 people that were on it in the United States. The no-fly list is about 50,000. Those have grown tremendously during the Obama administration. The no-fly list has grown about tenfold. And they're no longer even remotely close to what they originally started out to be. So you can be on the terror watch list simply because someone in the government wants to ask you a question, or, for any particular reason. There's no process that can particularly prevent somebody's name from going on the list. It's basically a black box. For the no-fly list, you can simply be a suspect, somebody that the government wants to interview about controversial statements, or you could be a victim of clerical errors, or somebody who the government has wanted to become an informant. Not that you've done anything wrong yourself, but if you refuse to become a government informant, you can also be on the no-fly list. But
let me just slow you down a second. Well, here's what I don't understand. The guy was interviewed in 2013 and 2014. So they had more than just a little bit of information on this guy.
Right.
Apparently he tried to get armor, body armor, and they said no. But he purchased new guns going through the FBI background and so forth. Isn't that weird to you? Is something a little off there?
Yeah, I would think that if his name would get a flag for something like body armor, he would get a flag for being able to go and buy a gun, too. I'm not sure how they could have done that differently in those 2 cases.
And he's more than, it was serious enough where they had to talk to this guy a couple of times, and people said, hey, look, this is a very, very dangerous man, and they had more, in other words, there was more there than even your typical denial, I think, on the FBI list.
Well, somebody can make controversial statements. They want to have some additional information that he's actually likely to act on those.
Like I have relatives who are associated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS?
Right. Those types of things, which obviously he did in this case, you think would have drawn additional attention.
You were going to say, until I interrupted you, about these lists.
People seem to think background checks are some magic bullet that's going to keep people from getting guns. If you really think somebody's a danger, then you ought to consider locking them up. Simply saying they can't legally obtain a weapon isn't much of a protection that you're going to have there. Look, the current background check system that we have is a complete mess. Virtually everybody who gets stopped is what we call a false positive. So when the president or Hillary Clinton goes out and says that there have been 2.4 million dangerous or prohibited people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks, that's simply a lie. What they should say is that there have been 2.4 million initial denials. I'll give you a simple example. You may remember the late Senator Ted Kennedy. There were 5 times where he was stopped from flying because a similar name was on the no-fly list. There was some guy connected with the IRA in Ireland that the British government had put on our no-fly list.
Or some guy that kind of screwed up at Chappaquiddick. I mean, whoa, that is Ted Kennedy. Anyway, go ahead.
So the point is that he stopped from flying 5 times. Would we count that as 5 times we stopped a terrorist from flying? Presumably, President Obama or Hillary Clinton wouldn't do that, but yet that's the way they're counting these background checks for gun purchases. It's one thing to stop somebody who's a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a name similar to a felon from buying a gun. And about 99% of these denials on the background checks for buying guns are what we call false positives. And that, when you're talking about 2.4 million people, there's a significant, if small, number of people that may have really needed a gun quickly for self-defense.
So this won't work. That's the bottom line. Even if they did it, it would be enormous difficulty for law-abiding American citizens to fight back to get a right to purchase a firearm. Why do you think the left keeps doing this? Obviously, they hate the Second Amendment, but what is it? They don't want to do the things that have to be done to make America safer?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think they want to do whatever they can to make it more costly for people to get guns. So in January, when President Obama held that CNN town hall, there was a woman who had been brutally raped for 3.5 hours asking him why he wanted to make it more difficult for law-abiding Americans to buy guns, and he assured her that there's nothing he was doing like that. In fact, he's in Washington, D.C. For you to transfer a gun legally in Washington, D.C., you have to pay a $125 fee. In New York City, there's one gun store that will do it for $125, another that will do it for $150, and then it's on up from there. But the cheapest state that you can find that has these background checks on private transfers is Washington State, and they're at $60 to go and transfer a gun. I mean, those fees may not stop you or I from being able to buy a gun, but poor minorities, very people who are most likely to be victims of crimes, those law-abiding individuals, $100 can make a difference between whether or not they're able to legally purchase a gun. They can't ban guns outright right now, though that may change with the Supreme Court. So what they try to do is impose fees and other things to do it. There's certain changes. If they really wanted to get these background checks, and I don't think they would reduce crime, but if they really wanted to have them there's certain changes that they could make that would easily get it passed. One is who pays for it. As an economist, I would say the people who benefit should be the ones who pay for it. And it's not just the person who's buying the gun who's supposedly going to get the lower crime rate, if they really believe that. It's going to be everybody. So pay for it out of general revenue. You go and bring that up to a gun control advocate, they will go nuts. I'll give you a simple example. When Colorado...
Well, we're going to have to go, John. We're getting a little too far in the weeds here. I just wanted to apply to what the situation that's going on today. You're encyclopedic. You have an encyclopedic memory on this stuff. You're really, really good, and I want to thank you. And if people want to read more about you and your organization, where do they go?
They can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
All right, John. Many, many thanks. I appreciate it. It's damn pathetic that we have to get into this today. And yet we do, because the president's brought this up twice, because Hillary Clinton keeps bringing it up, because the Democrats bring it up. They want you to think that they have an answer to this. The problem is they're the problem. They don't have any answers. They have it upside down. In order to secure a country, you need to secure the country. You need to control who's coming in here. And if you know there are hotbeds of potential terrorism, you don't pretend there's not. And by punishing law-abiding Americans, which is what liberals love to do because it's just easy to do, Americans just seem to go along with it, you're not going to secure this country.